Holla ballers, and welcome to the review of Baldur's Gate 3. This is a game that I've just invested probably 160 hours in, and I have a lot of thoughts. 160 hours is not a great deal of time for this game. This game is capable of probably 6 or 7 playthroughs to really explore everything, and that's with Googling what's going on. But 160 hours is more than enough to discuss about a video game. This is not one of those where it's like, you've got to play for 200 hours before you can really grasp it. That's not really fair for any video game. Baldur's Gate 3. Coming into this then, let's discuss my experience, is that I played Baldur's Gate 1 when I was a kid. I remember basically nothing about it whatsoever. I tried to play Baldur's Gate 2 after I played Divinity Original Sin 2. Divinity I played a couple of years ago and fell in love with it. Absolutely adored Divinity. is ranked currently as, I think, number 3 in my top RPGs of all time. I love it. It's up there with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy XIV's Heaven's Ward and Shadowbringers storylines. Absolutely adore it. So I was very excited for Baldur's Gate 3. I left Baldur's Gate 3 for 6 months so that my live audience, could play through and enjoy the story before I came in and spoiled it for everybody. We tend to play things that way over on my channel. And so it was time to jump in and get invested. I was super excited. But it has been a long time since I'd played the Dungeons & Dragons rule set, which meant the early game was a little bit of reminding of how to play properly and use the turns effectively and the buffs and things like that. But by the by, this was my settings for going in. A real recent playthrough was Divinity Original Sin 2, and then into Baldur's Gate 3. Okay. This game is so big, I think, that it's off-putting to some people. Despite the fact I 100% agree, this game is deserving of not only Game of the Year, but probably Game of the next 7 years. This is a game that I can say you should have in your repertoire of video games, because it's extraordinary. If you're interested in the medium of video games, I know that sounds pretentious, but give me some rope here. The medium of video games compared to, say, a movie or a book is that you can make decisions. And very often in video games, that decision-making process is taken away from you because they want you to experience a story in a very cinematic way. And sometimes that works really, really well. But we often say phrases like on rails, very linear, and that's because your character, even in some very RPG settings, which is role-playing, you're supposed to be playing a role within a game world, is dictated to you by what the creators envision or the scope of the game, right? We can expect that in an FPS game, that there isn't going to be a super amount of choice in where you go. One of the reasons The Witcher 3 is so highly regarded is you got to make a ton of choices, right? Although the story will ultimately conclude to a certain ending, your pathway there is massively varied. And Larian in particular is player choice first, right? That's the joy of Dungeons & Dragons. If you're going to play D&D, it's the flexibility of the character to be like, well, my character would do this, my character would do that. And putting that into a video game in the way Baldur's Gate 3 has is a monumental task. I dread to think of exactly how many pathways and choices there actually are in the game in total, because there are still, I know after my playthrough of people who played for 600-700 hours already, I was discovering things they'd never seen before, which speaks to the sheer density and quantity of game that is on offer with Baldur's Gate 3. And it's very apparent from the first 5 minutes of the game, is that is absolutely the case, is it just constantly throws at you scenarios, situations. You can have players stay, you can have companions leave, you can have them all leave, you can do whatever you want. This character is actually just plays differently. Every choice you make in nearly every quest. And Act 1 is a true testament to that. Act 1, I'd say, is one of at the time, was one of the densest video games I'd ever encountered. You can barely move more than 10 meters in that game without a new storyline kicking up that is not just filler. Like, it's interesting. You might encounter some people harassing an old woman on the street, and then you can intervene, and you can either support the old lady, you can support the guys, you can fight the guys, you can beat the old lady up, you can do whatever you want to do. As well as you could throw her in a river if you want to, or you can just interfere and find out about the story, and then you can ask questions on that. And that will then lead you, just this little encounter, onto a storyline involving a hag, and then you might discover a swamp, but one of your characters detects something mysterious is going on, because it's a nice, beautiful scenario. And therefore you realize these are actually all like hobgoblins that are disguised as beautiful things. But your character might not discover that. So in fact, from your perspective, it's just a beautiful landscape. And then you find a house, and in there is a hag. But this hag has a few options to do with her as you find the sister. The story is, yes, she does have the sister, this pregnant sister. And she's sat at the table. And your instincts are to rescue this girl. But the hag is also a trader who has very valuable items on her. And she's probably quite a tough boss. What are you going to do here? So in my decision, I decided to fight the hag, which caused her to disappear and take the girl with her. I could have just left the girl there. I could have been a more evil guy. I could have spoken to the girl and found out more about her in that scenario. But my joy was to get freedom, so I had to deal with that, which then led me to an underground cave. And there are all these sort of Kabbalists, these ritualists who are being controlled by the hag. Had to deal with those. Are they innocents? I could save them if I wanted to, or I could kill them. I could also put on their masks and I can get manipulated by the hag. Or I could go in a different way and end up in a room where this girl is suspended above a cavern in a wooden box, and then the hag is like burning it to kill her. So you're like, wait, we do need to save her. We've got to do this. So you can deal with that, and you have to either save her, or maybe the girl dies at this point. Who knows? It depends on your choices in the encounter. You could put water onto the... Okay, maybe if I throw water at the burning cage, it will save her because it's made of wood. Maybe I could just kill the hag in time and get her down. Maybe I don't do it in time and she dies. All these are accounted for in the game, and then you save the hag. And then you kill the hag. You kill the hag, you get the girl out, and it turns out the girl didn't want to be saved. And she didn't want to be saved by you because she wants to sacrifice her baby to the hag in order for her to raise a new hag so that she can get her husband back. She prefers to have her husband back. And then you're like, wow, you would really kill your own kid to get your husband back. And then you have choices like, do you want to bring her husband back? Because you can do that, or you can not, because that's weird, but you can choose to do it, which I did, and then you raise her husband as a zombie. And this happens because you bumped into some guy on the side of the street, and this happens constantly. Like, everywhere. You can set yourself a goal every single time you log in to play Baldur's Gate, which is like, hey, I'm going to do this quest, and by the time you get there, you've done 20 other things, and hours have passed, and you've still not completed that quest. And that happens to me all the time, because I generally play on stream in sort of like 6 to 8 hour sessions, and very often I would start the day with a task and we would never get there. And a great example of that would probably be one of the earliest quests in the games, which is to go to the Goblins camp and deal with a situation there. And I had that quest for probably 6 days and never made it. And in that time, I spanned an underground world. I fought machines on top of towers. I fought giant monsters, and I dealt with slavers. I visited a dwarven underground forge city. I had massacres going on. I saved a whole town of tieflings that were being outcasts due to sort of racism and problems like that. I did all these things in that time. For many people, that probably sounds amazing. But one thing I definitely noticed over my playthrough is that the further I got in, the less people had reached that point. And I think that's one of the difficulties a game like Baldur's Gate 3 deals with, but also thrives in, is this game is endless. This is a game that you can absolutely play now, in 2 years, in 15 years, and it's fine, and you're still going to have an absolutely wonderful experience, because it's going to be pretty timeless, unless like graphically it falls apart or someone moves the genre forward in an extreme way to make this very antiquated. This is a game that's okay to be like, I played this game for 50 hours, which is a lot. It's a huge time commitment for many people, and I want to play something else. Like, for example, in our world, it'd be like, well, the new season of Path of Exile launched, the new season of new expansion of Final Fantasy XIV came out, the new expansion of World of Warcraft came out, whatever it might be, the new mega game Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out, new Resident Evil is coming out, and it's going to sit there and wait for you. And that, in and of itself, puts it above everything else, in my opinion. Is it flawless? No. The problem is, the game is also so huge that, yeah, like, on occasion, the game gets confused. And it's rare. And it's got so many pathways and branches that I forgive it. I think that's fair. Often we don't forgive bugs and breaks in games. I actually saw a lot of people who were like, classic bugs. Yes, it'd be nice if they got ironed out. There's no doubt about it. You don't want bugs in your game. So I definitely had moments in Act 2 and Act 3. Act 1 released in early access, and a lot of people got to playtest it, so Act 1 is very, very polished. Like, ridiculously polished, to the point of absurdity, in my opinion. And I really want to stress the word absurdity. The level of detail in this game and choices and that are accounted for by the developers is absurd. Like, the scope of this game is absurd. Absolutely absurd. It's way over the top. For most games of its value. And Larian deserves so much praise for what they've achieved here, because it is absurd compared to what you're getting for the same value for money elsewhere. It's not even close. Act 1 in itself would be considered to be a huge game for most AAA studios, in my opinion. Just Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3, most studios would be like, that's a $60 game of itself, and will release Act 2 as Baldur's Gate 2, the continuation of the story or whatever. Like they're doing with Final Fantasy VII, right? It's a full game, but we know Final Fantasy VII originally was so much bigger, and they're doing it in like chapters and stages. That's what a normal AAA company would do with a game of this scope, and Larian's like, nope, here it all is. Keep going. And it is astonishing to see. But those bugs are problematic, and they're kind of infamous at this point amongst the community. But I do think there's some forgiveness there, but they should be ironed out. I think it is in a game where you can be so invested in certain stories. Having some stories spoiled because the game is a little confused as to the pathway you took there in a world of infinite pathways, and it is like infinite pathways. It just gets a little stuck sometimes. Like, yeah, you probably did do this, and you're like, I didn't do that. Or you're talking to somebody. I had this with the companions a lot. If I'd not spoke to them in a little while because I was focused on doing a certain task, is they would then ask me about things that we did a while ago and say, we should go and do that. And I'm like, we did that ages ago. And then the next dialogue is like, okay, now we dealt with that. And it's like, it'd be nice if the game recognized that had already happened, because it does do that in Act 1. Again, it's a little bit of polish and work, but I consider it minor and very forgivable to go along there. My overall thoughts on this game is, I think this is the perfect game, in my mind, for somebody who's a one game a year kind of guy. And I actually think often about my wife's father with this game. My wife's father is older now. He's nearly getting to his 70s, but he still loves video games. And when I met him, all he wanted to talk about was Oblivion. And he had played Oblivion for possibly 2 years because they didn't have any money, and he wanted games that like would last the test of time. And I was like, Oblivion's perfect. And then he got Skyrim, and he was good with Skyrim for like the next 2 years, and then he discovered free-to-play MMOs, and he was playing like free-to-play MMO forever, like up until today. And I was like, I'm thinking about guys like that, and people, and I would recommend this to anybody you know who's like this, who's like, they don't have that kind of time to play multitudes of games. Like, oh, the latest game's coming out. Oh, cool. I'm going to binge it in the next week and get it done. And then I'm going to do that again and again and again. But I love video games. They love video games. They come home, they work. And like, Baldur's Gate 3 will see you endlessly. Obviously, you do like some variety and spice in life. For like all time, for some people, this game will just keep going and going and going. And it's one of the best games I played, but I would be undeniable in saying by the end I found it a little exhausting by playing it continuously all the way through. I have to be real on that. By the Act 3, I think, because it almost feels backloaded, which is ridiculous as to how dense Act 1 is, right? So let's talk about this a little bit. Act 1 is extraordinarily dense because you're not prepared for it. Act 2 is less so, possibly because of what happened in my playthrough. But Act 2 changes the pace. I wasn't complaining either. It was a little bit more spaced out, more atmospheric. Stories weren't every 10 yards or so, but the stories we got were very, very interesting. Interesting, crazy mausoleums of murderers, or tombs with mysterious sort of sci-fi elements going on to them. The huge tower of this immortal creature, a beer-drinking monstrosity. All those elements were slower but more rich in some ways than I found in Act 1, which was like content. This was more like eerie. Again, coming back to that darkness, a land ravaged by plague, some lights in the darkness. And I really liked that. And then Act 3, once we arrive in Rivington, is like There's 8 billion NPCs here, and going to the circus is a full day of gaming. And that's what it's going to be, with characters popping up, boss fights popping up left and right, mysterious things going on, Jinn that take you off, secrets galore, all sorts of things happening. A simple it was, if you followed my playthrough, Act 3 in Lower City, the only way I could strategically plan to manage that area was to go building to building, because each building essentially was a couple of hours of activities to do for the most part. There are definitely some that aren't, but you were like, okay, what's this building? Okay, now we're going off to hell, and we're going to do a day in hell. Now we're going here, and now we've got a whole thing with Shadowheart's parents. Now we're going here, and it's a whole curse storyline, and these buildings are like next to each other. And then now it's the Steelwatch Foundry, and now there's a Titanic Goliath boss down there. That's the way Act 3 is, and by the end of it, I'm like, there's still so much that I probably should have given myself a break. And I think that's appropriate, and I think that's what a lot of people did, because that's what I noticed in my audience, is like, yeah, this is kind of where I started to take a break. Because it's a lot. Unless you're diehard into it and you're like grinding it out, it's a lot for your average gamer to be like, okay, I'm like 130 hours in, and I'm still overwhelmed by what is left to do, despite the fact that I'm enjoying myself. There's still so much left to do. Is that a problem, though? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's a complaint against the game. It's more a case of this game you should be fine with taking a break and coming back, because you're just going to have probably a richer experience that way. It's like, cool, now I've got some free time. I've got some time off work. I've been playing something else for a while. I've got that. It's like a buffet, right? That if you're always eating the same thing, then you want something to change the taste buds a little bit, and then you want to go back to your favorite thing. And I think that's perfectly. And that's what my summary of Baldur's Gate 3 is. I would give this an S tier rating. Absolutely S tier. And I think from a lot of people, outside of the very diehard, this is best enjoyed probably an act at a time, unless you're really invested in what's happening next, because it will suck your life away. And then it's going to ask for more, which is where I am right now. I'm going to play this game again. 100%, because there's still so much more for me to see. But what a joy. What a joy and experience. I'm really happy. I want to break away from it now, which is what I'm doing. And then I will pick it up when I have some free time and keep going through the game, plodding forward and experiencing the stories as and when they come. Because this is a game that comes along once every 10 years or something, right? Like, it's once every 10 years, and rightfully so, because it's a deluge of content and value for money off this game. If you enjoy it, especially if you enjoy the combat style, which a lot of people don't, I understand that, is ridiculous, absolutely ludicrous. Like, you're paying hours of content for a penny if you enjoy this game. That's my thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3. Thumbs up, fully recommend, and I'll see you in our next big project. Bye, everybody. Why are you just stood around in your underpants?
Washing my pits, this is the song when I'm... Aye! Could a bloke not get any bleeding privacy around here? Bunch of perverts, the lot of you.